ourselves is really near and dear to my heart, and I think so important. And I want to note that I'm not a Rhode Island lawyer. That's why we have Dawn here. I am licensed in Massachusetts, but obviously I am the GLAD lawyer who's affiliated with Rhode Island, and I've really been enjoying getting to know Rhode Islanders, and I'm really happy to be here with Sage Rhode Island today. It's a pleasure. So I'll turn it over to Dawn.
Thank you. I am glad to be here today and to chat with all of you, and I look forward to a discussion about and any questions that we can help answer, because I know that we want to make sure that the session is as helpful for everyone as possible. And so my name's Dawn Euer. I work in I have my own law practice, the law office of Dawn Euer. And I've been in practice since I graduated from law school in 2010, and I actually hung my own shingle and started my own practice in 2014. I know some of you on the screen from working on marriage equality back between 2011 and 2013, so it's good to see some familiar faces. And then I also ran for office and am a current sitting state senator representing Newport and Jamestown. So I also, as part of my practice, I do a lot of family law, a lot of adoptions, some planning, wills and trusts. So, so I think today will be a good conversation. So, Polly, do you want me to give kind of an overview of what we were planning on discussing? So, so today, I think part of what we're going to talk about is really why is planning important. So Polly and I will both talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about an overview of some of the kind of more commonly used terms, what the different documents are, the healthcare proxy, wills, things like that. We'll talk about the best practices, how to select an attorney, how to work with an attorney, what you should expect from your attorney when you're working with them. And then we'll open it up for Q&A. So we don't plan on talking for the whole hour. We want to kind of get some baseline information and then turn it over to you so that we can make sure that this is as helpful as possible for everyone. So did I miss anything, Polly? You want me to launch into it? Okay. So, really the why is planning important? And planning is important really to make sure that you understand what your wishes are and to help make sure that your beneficiaries and, who is left, who your survivors are, your loved ones, are taken care of. And so it's really about making sure, you're the one who knows best what the relationships you have with people, what sort of expectations people have as far as your property and all of the things that are in your estate. And also, by the way, part of this conversation today is also about, your medical decisions and taking care of yourself and making sure that you're able to be taken care of in the medical field, that you have the documentation in place. So, if you're needing to, enter long-term care or even short-term care, that, your loved ones know what your wishes are for your medical care, and they can help be your advocate throughout the system. So I think that's just, I don't know, Polly, what do you want to add to that?
Yeah, well, I think that's absolutely right. The why is so important. And I think, lives are incredibly busy and we sometimes tend to put things off, but I think it's important to think about that why and do planning to kind of avoid the worst case scenarios. And in terms of the why, I want to share just a case that I worked on a few years ago in Massachusetts, which really for me underscored the need for some basic planning, right? Which I think so many of us need support in. So I worked with a wonderful woman who was in her 80s. Her name was, I'll just use initials, B, and B and her partner were in a long-term 30-year non-marital relationship. And D was hospitalized due to dementia. And it was in that kind of diagnosis period and was hospitalized for that diagnosis. And the hospital that they were in Massachusetts didn't feel like a welcoming place. And B didn't feel like she could be open about who she was and that this was her long-term partner. And long story short, the hospital sought guardianship of Dee, and the nephew, who had been somewhat involved in this kind of diagnosis process, was appointed her guardian without notice to B. Right, the law actually provided that she get notice even as a non-marital partner, but the hospital just went ahead and asked for guardianship for the nephew. And Dee was sent out of state to Mississippi, where she had never lived and didn't have strong connections. And that's when B reached out to GLAAD, and we were able to work with her. She was a phenomenal advocate for her partner. And when she realized that the situation was really becoming abusive, that the nephew had sold her car, was taking her Social Security funds, when it was really clear that there were some nefarious things happening, we worked with B and, successfully got a court order returning her to the state of Massachusetts and to her partner. So it was pretty extensive litigation between two states. The good news is she's now back in Massachusetts. She's in a different hospital system, which is providing her really culturally affirming and competent care and is supporting their relationship, and recognizing B as her partner and caregiver. So she's back with her long-term love, but it was a very long and stressful road. And, looking back, she actually, with a healthcare proxy, with some kind of basic planning, could have been helpful in that process, right? And really making it clear to the hospital that she had been in, that this was her partner and this was who needed to be making the decisions, in any event. So some of this planning is really just to avoid some potentially negative consequences, which I hope are very rare. But obviously we want to do whatever we can to have our loved ones making our decisions for us. Anyway, so I'll pass it off. So we were thinking that Dawn's going to kind of give an overview of what some of those planning documents are, right? What are the nuts and bolts? What do folks need to know about some of these kind of protections that are helpful for decision making in the financial area and healthcare?
So one of the documents that Polly actually kind of mentioned was the healthcare proxy. So a healthcare proxy, it's basically exactly what Polly was saying. It's a document where you name somebody who can make, somebody that you trust, that you've had a conversation with about what your wishes would be as far as medical treatment, that they can make the decisions for you if, at a point in time where you're unable to make them for yourself. This form is really important because of laws like HIPAA. I'm sure people have heard the term HIPAA before. It's the health privacy laws. And because of those privacy laws, doctors and hospitals are really limited on what information they can share with people who are not the patient. And so a healthcare proxy, it not only allows the person to make decisions, but it also allows the doctor and the healthcare system to be able to share information with your loved one as well. And so that's a form in Rhode Island. There's a statutory form, meaning that there's a form that is already kind of pre-populated. It's really a fill in the blank type of form that you can go onto the Department of Health website. You can find it's called the Durable Power of Attorney for Healthcare statutory form. And I'm sure we can send out an email that has the links to all of these things afterwards as well. But so that's one of the forms, and again, it really helps with the decision making, the conversations between the hospital, the healthcare staff, the doctors, and your loved ones. There's also
I put that into the chat as well.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
Yep. And so you heard me say when I said the title of that document, it's a durable power of attorney for healthcare. There's also durable power of attorney. It can also be referred to as, people will also sometimes refer to as a financial power of attorney. There's also kind of more general powers of attorneys. What a power of attorney does, there's the healthcare power of attorney, and then there's also the ability to make financial decisions. So a power of attorney can be drafted that will give someone, again, it gives someone permission to act on your behalf. So to pay bills, to pay your taxes, to open bank accounts, to transfer money between bank accounts. Because if you're not in a position to make your own healthcare decisions, but you might still need to make sure you're paying your mortgage. You know, you're going to need to make sure those healthcare bills get paid. And so that is a separate document from the medical power of attorney. So that would just be the durable power of attorney. The other document that gets talked about a lot is a living will or an advance directive. This is another form that the Department of Health has on their website. That's really, it's a check the box, kind of fill out the form. And that one is really about, you know, do you want a feeding tube? There's been a lot of litigation over the years about who can make decisions about placing and removing a feeding tube. You know, so feeding tube, do you want to be resuscitated if there's an emergency situation? Do you want to be put on a ventilator? All of those types of, you know, what sort of medical intervention into your healthcare do you want the doctors to be making? And filling out that form in conjunction with the medical power of attorney, it kind of sets the standard of to make sure that your wishes are clear, both to the doctors and to whoever is serving as your healthcare proxy. The other thing that the other two documents that I want to mention is there's a funeral planning form that the state of Rhode Island has. It's another one where they have a standard form that you can fill out. That really is about, so one of the fun things about all of the lawyers being involved in making these rules is the funeral planners really make sure that they get paid at the end of the day. So you can't close out an estate or you can't close out probate without the funeral costs being paid. And so the funeral planning form is really about designating somebody who's going to be taking care of all of those details and paying the bills. And then finally, the other document that people are pretty aware of is a will. And that the will is obviously after you've passed away, how your property is transferred to your beneficiaries. So I did see a question about, do the forms need to be notarized? I believe they all do have to be notarized. I think let me just double check, the healthcare proxy, that does have to be notarized. And I believe that I'm just looking at the,
I did a quick look through. I think that most of them have to be notarized except for maybe the most.
The advance directive, the living will, that one has to be witnessed, but it does not have to be notarized. But
that's a question I'll ask Dawn of you is, in COVID-19, has Rhode Island suspended in-person notary requirements or given folks another way of doing that?
Yeah, so during COVID-19, there's people can do virtual notarizations. So it's a process basically where you have to sign it. It allows you to do through a video chat that we could watch you sign it, and then you mail the forms, and then, you know, we'll sign and notarize it. So you don't have to actually meet somebody in person right now. Although I have done actually a couple of real estate closings, and I did actually just finish a will, because wills, you want to get, typically you'll get 2 witnesses to witness a will as well as a notary. So there's a lot of people that need to be around the table to fully execute a will. And those, I just did one actually at a park. We all met outside at a picnic table at the park, and everyone brought their own pens. So. So I think those are the you know, kind of the overview of the main forms and the main documents that that are used for, you know, medical planning and for estate planning. So I don't know, Polly, if you had anything else to add, or if you wanted to talk about you know, how to find an attorney.
Yeah, I can move on to another topic, but I have a question for you before we move on to my topic, which is, What would you say to someone who says, gosh, do I need to do all of these? Like, are some more important than others? Like, what's the answer to that?
Yeah, I think everybody needs a will. Um, that's a definite. And also the other thing I'll say in addition to the will is, on your bank accounts and on your insurance, make sure that you are updating on a regular basis your beneficiaries, because those don't necessarily get folded into your will. So, if you have a savings account, if you have a retirement account, you know, you need to work directly with that financial service provider to update your beneficiaries. And I would recommend, once a year, put it in your calendar. Let's say January 15th every year, you go through and you look at all your financial accounts every year and just make sure your beneficiaries are updated. I don't think that you have to do all of the documents. So as far as the medical, as far as the medical documents, I definitely would prioritize the medical power of attorney, because in that document, you can actually, write in the specifics about whether you do or don't want a feeding tube. You can write in whether you do or don't want to be resuscitated. If there's certain types of treatments, if you have a diagnosis and you have talked to your doctor and you know that they're going to be offering, X, Y, or Z treatment, you can write there's blanks to write into the medical power of attorney. So you can say, I know that the doctor was saying that I should do that. I don't want to do that. So you can just write that right into the blank. So I think that's the short answer.
Is there a hierarchy to the power if you don't do a medical power of attorney? Is there a hierarchy? Does it go to your kid and then your parents and then your cousins? Is there a flow to that?
Yeah. So, and this is where it gets complicated with HIPAA and, so spousal relationships are usually kind of the priority decision maker. And, this is kind of where it does get really important to have the medical, if you're going to be in a position and you're aware that you're going to be in a position where you're not going to be able to make decisions for yourself, this is why it's important to have that medical proxy in place. Because, I think where complications end up happening and where you can end up in bad situations is, what if your parents are still alive, or you have siblings that don't get along with your partner or your spouse? If you're not married, but you have a longtime partner, but your siblings are still around, I think that there is, the medical system will defer to those familial relationships. And I think, this is one of the things when, marriage equality passed, that, suddenly some of the decision making that had been maybe a little bit more, in some ways, open and accepting to different family structures, some of the attitude was, well, if you had that relationship, then you should just get married, which I know that's not people's lives, and that's a completely inappropriate response. But the problem is that, if you're in a medical crisis and you're having who are your loved ones around you who aren't on the same page, that becomes very challenging for the medical staff to try to determine, who should be the one who's making the decision. And quite frankly, there's a lot of litigation on that exact topic area around the country. So there's a lot of online services. So what I would recommend is that you could start there, but I wouldn't finish there. I would always, if you want to get it drafted, through an online, LegalZoom or whatever the other, services are out there, I would recommend that once you get, you can bring the draft to an attorney who's practicing in your state, and they should be able to review it for you.
All right, great.
Which might be a good segue into talking about lawyers and working with lawyers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which, in any event, so I used to have my own law firm. So I feel like, and I don't anymore. Obviously I work for a nonprofit organization. So I have, anyway, so I just kind of wanted to share some thoughts on working with lawyers, because I think, in my experience, also being a client myself, it can be an intimidating process, right? And finding the right one, knowing, forging a good relationship, and all that, particularly for the LGBTQ community or folks who are dealing with some kind of difference that feels like there might be barriers in that relationship. So I'll talk through some of the thoughts I have and some of the best practices, and maybe you all have some to share as well based on your experience in the past, and Dawn as well. So, I mean, I tend to think that, Dawn, I think you make a great point about, it might be helpful to do some research online and to kind of get some basics, but I do think that, particularly in the area of planning, that, a lawyer in your state who has expertise in that area is really important, right? Particularly in an area like estate planning, which is relatively specific, and that it's helpful to seek legal guidance, to make sure that you're getting all of the planning in place that's really good for you individually, right? I mean, I think Rhode Island is really lucky to have a lot of forms, right? Like when Massachusetts doesn't have we have a statutory healthcare power of attorney, but Rhode Island really has a lot of really good forms for all of those other categories of planning. So there's some great resources out there, but I think it could be helpful to have legal advice to kind of look at it all together, make sure they all flow together, and particularly make sure your will, or if you're doing a trust, and that everything is kind of an organized plan that will really protect you in terms of decision making when you need it most. Because again, I think that the case of B&D really shows that, an ounce of like the planning in advance can really save a lot of heartache and sadness and harm. So anyway, my first tip is find a lawyer who knows what they're doing, right? There's so many different kinds of lawyers. Like you don't go to a criminal lawyer for estate planning. Make sure that folks have experience doing estate planning, and perhaps are certified by kind of one of the national organizations, and I'll tell you what those are for estate planning, or just have that in their practice that they do a substantial amount of that work, right? Because there are a lot of people who don't necessarily have any certifications but do a considerable amount of this kind of work. So make sure your lawyer knows what they're doing. And also, and how do you find those kind of people? Obviously, as with anything, I think research is really important. That's online research, that's talking to friends, to trusted providers. Like I think word of mouth is often a good, do people have they had a good experience with the lawyer? So the National Association of Estate Planners is a national organization that certifies estate planners, that you have a level of competency in this area. The National Elder Law Association also has a certification kind of program that says, yes, I have experience doing planning in the elder law, Medicaid planning area. I think the Rhode Island Department of Elderly Affairs and the Rhode Island Bar Association also has referral services as well. So I think, it's a process of, researching a number of people and then interviewing them, right? Which, I don't know, when I was in my practice, I always encourage folks to interview a bunch of, talk to 2 or 3 folks, right? Set up initial meetings or call their office. How do you get treated by the people who you're talking to on the phone? How do you get treated over email? Ask questions, right? Particularly at the outset of that relationship. Like, how do they charge fees? How do they communicate with folks? Like, will they meet with you virtually in the world of COVID-19? Like, I think it's really fair to ask those questions. And, how long will this type of work take? Like, what's your process? Do you send drafts by email? Do you send drafts in the mail? Like, really understand what are your personal needs and ask questions of the lawyers to see, before you even kind of go down a road, whether they're able to meet your needs. And I think as a consumer, I mean, when I had my own law firm, I really encouraged people to ask me those questions, right? Because we want to have a good fit. We want to have a good relationship with the client, and we want to make sure people are getting what they need. And in terms of fit, I mean, I think that's a personal assessment, right? Because your friend might have had a great experience with somebody, but they're not a good fit for you for whatever reason. And that's also okay. And I think that meeting with people, is a good way to really assess whether it's a good fit. I think obviously the lawyer-client relationship is a privileged relationship, right? You should be able to share anything with that lawyer. They're going to keep it confidential, and they're really going to hopefully serve your needs. So you should feel free to be open and honest with those people. And if you're not able to do that with someone, like if you get that feeling, I guess I would listen to that feeling, but hopefully the goal is to be, share all of your information with the lawyer so they can serve you as well as possible. And obviously Rhode Island is a state, like all states in New England, like lawyers have an ethical duty to act fairly and with non-discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity, right? They're supposed to be acting ethically and with, in an affirming manner. That obviously might not be the reality on the ground, but just to let you know that is their ethical obligation. And I also like to tell people, like, in terms of working with a lawyer, like if you're working with a lawyer and it turns out not to be a good fit in the end, you can always change lawyers, right? There's, people move between lawyers, and that's absolutely acceptable. Although obviously I think you want to try to do the research and try to find somebody who's a good fit, before you engage with the work. And then in terms of working with a lawyer, obviously I think communication is so important, right? They should be communicating with you. They should be responding to you. And vice versa, right? Because sometimes clients have their to-do lists or the things they need to think about, and make sure obviously that the client is following up on their end as well. But I think that communication and that clarity and that transparency is really important, right? Like if they never get back to you after 3 months, not okay, right? They should be, which that happens in some folks. They should be in communication with you. They should be responsive to your emails or your calls, and it should be a relationship of mutual respect and engagement. And also, I think that with planning, it's not kind of a one and done, right? I think the goal is hopefully to do some good planning, to really have it be thoughtful, and then revisit it if there's a big life change. Like let's say one of your decision makers unfortunately passes away or becomes incapacitated themselves, then you'll need to update. And also I think the routine of, hey, I don't know what the advice is these days, Dawn, but like every 5 to 10 years, looking back to that whole plan and making sure, does this still make sense? Do I need to update it? Because obviously people's life circumstances change, and you want to make sure that you don't just stuff it in a drawer and never look back. So to me, those are some thoughts I have about how to work with a lawyer and how to think about planning, so that you're prepared. Which throws me back to a question for Dawn, and then obviously I want to open up for questions for everybody, which is, where do you tell your clients to put their documents, right? Like if I don't think anybody's really traveling very long and far these days, right? But if you have your healthcare proxy and you've given it to your doctor, but you unfortunately have an accident in another town and you're in a hospital, how do you tell your clients to say, so that the providers you're engaging with know this information?
Well, yeah, that's a really good question. And actually, before I dive in directly to that, one of the things that I also thought of as we're having this conversation about selecting a lawyer and thinking about, some of the online services and really having a comprehensive conversation about planning, one of the elements of these power of attorneys is that they are effective upon signature. The way that the statutory forms are, they're effective upon signature. There are also forms out there for financial powers of attorney, but I have heard horror stories of people who have been given, for example, the financial power of attorney, and then tried taking credit cards out in the person's name. And then it can become a real, abuse and fraudulent situation. So one of the things actually when I do financial power of attorney, I've done a few for folks who had Alzheimer's diagnoses, where I basically had a triggering clause that it only became effective upon signature of 2 doctors who would attest to the fact that the patient was no longer able to make decisions for themselves. Because then that gives a level of protection, so that you can execute the document, but then you need that further attestation by the physicians, by the treating physicians. But I think as far as where you're storing the documents, wills, you need the original copy of the will. You need to know where that is, and it needs to be in a safe place. So whether that's a safe deposit box at your bank, whether that is in a safe deposit, in a safe in your house, some sort of, fireproof. This is another thing. Floods and fires always throw people off because nobody's ever expecting their house to burn down. And so people, it's everyone thinks that it's not going to happen to them until it happens. So, fire safe boxes that you can, keep in your home. But the biggest thing is to make sure that whoever that proxy is or whoever that executor is on the will, that they know that they know that the document exists and they know where to find it. And they will have access to it if something happens to you. And so, that's going to be really dependent on, every individual situation. So if you get, if you have your medical proxy and you want to keep it in your safe deposit box at the bank, make sure that the bank knows that your proxy can also access, that safe deposit box to get access to that if something should happen to you. So.
Well, I also just want to share personally, like I travel with my documents with me. I mean, honestly, so if I'm going somewhere, I often have them with me on my person. But that's just me personally. I travel with copies. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Although I'll be honest, I also have children and I'm a non-biological parent. So for those documents, I travel with with certified copies. But those are different kind of documents because there are certified copies. Estate planning, it's an original or a copy. I'm sure we can't give particular legal advice, but just like kind of legal information. But I will say in terms of the pets that Donna Turley, who's a lawyer in Massachusetts, but I think just an advocate in general for pets, she's an estate planner who focuses on pet issues. So that's, to me, I'm like, I kind of want to get that answer from her because I think that's a phenomenal question. And also she's a good resource for that issue. I'm going to put her name in the chat as well. Because I don't know that answer, maybe Dawn does, but I know that Donna has really thought carefully because this is an area of passion for her to make sure that there's protection for those, for animals after death. But anyway, Dawn, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, I think generally what I've seen folks do is to set up, who the caretaker would be, and to set up some portion of the property so that there would be some, funds to support, their care and things like that is typically how I've seen that addressed. Right. So it's you're right. They're treated like property. So it's almost transferring that property and then also adding the funds to take care of them. I know that there's been a few bills actually up at the State House to try to clarify that. Actually, both in estate planning and in divorces, actually, because it has become an issue that has gotten more top burner. But that's how I would say to address it. I would love to hear too, Polly, if your contact in Massachusetts has more ideas, maybe we can adopt some of that in Rhode Island. As far as your older sister, I am not 100% sure. I mean, I obviously don't know all of your circumstances, which is why we can't give specific legal advice. But I will say, I think that there's a lot of, well, not a lot, but some attorneys will, because of the tendency for people to kind of get their wills completed and not want to have to address it again. There's often the advice to, not will assets to people who may predecease you. And so if there's the assumption that your sister being 12 years older would predecease you, that then, obviously then if she predeceases you, she wouldn't get the money. So they should have kind of gone through and explained, depending on your familial situation, what would have happened to those assets had you included your sister, and if she predeceases you.
There was a question in the chat that I just want to elevate, which was, under what circumstances are wills contested? By whom, for what reasons, and what's the process? Dawn, do you want to jump in on that in Rhode Island?
Yeah, so I will say probably one of the most common reasons that wills would be contested is if you had, if your will was drafted and then you had a major life event, so birth of a child, a divorce or a marriage, and then you pass away without your will being updated. That's probably the most common scenario. So if there's, somebody who would have been a beneficiary under your will, but again, you had this life circumstance happen, but didn't get around to updating your will. So that's probably the most common reason that people are contesting wills. And so in Rhode Island, so when somebody passes away, their estate gets filed with the probate court, and then the will, if the will exists, the will has to be presented to the probate court. I think it's within 48 hours of the person's death. So it's a really quick. It's a really kind of quick process as far as it getting started. And then there's options to get, to dispute, through the process. At that point, anyone who is going to assert that they should be a beneficiary or, asserting that there's some sort of issue with the will. I mean, there's also, sometimes people will say, well, that person, they executed that will under duress, so they might try to just kind of undermine the whole will. And I mean, for the reasons is really just that there's a disagreement about what they perceive as how the property should be distributed. So, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, I think that's one of the reasons why it's important to go to somebody who really knows how to draft wills. So it's not only the language, but it's also the execution, right? Because that's one of the reasons why we have witnesses and why there are notary requirements, is to make sure that people are signing it freely, voluntarily, and that they don't have some kind of incapacity that's making them unable to be making decisions, right? So I think hopefully the process protections in place will also do considerable work to avoid contests in the future. I don't know if that's fair to say, Dawn.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I mean, with the dementia, Alzheimer's, if there's any sort of adjustments made to a will while somebody is, not in full mental capacity, that is kind of ripe for their will to be challenged if adjustments are made during that period of time. Point is well taken. You're absolutely right. I think that definitely the way that the laws are drafted, does focus on coupledom, does focus on those assumptions, which is why, GLAAD and other groups have done a great job of litigation trying to, change some of the laws and shift that policy. But that, a well-drafted will can be what overcomes those preferences that are written into law, right? So, I mean, if you, the whole purpose of a will is so that you get to decide where your assets go, who gets to receive your assets.
No, I think that, yeah. First of all, I want to apologize for having come across as everybody's in a relationship, because that's certainly not the case, and definitely aware of that. And so thank you for raising the question. Well, on my end, I'm happy to do some digging about, you're right. There are lawyers who, or non-lawyers, but people who do professionally kind of serve in that capacity of helping to make decisions and helping to be the person who. So, I'm happy to dig around and talk to Dawn and to others in the community who might, and obviously encourage, kind of based on the suggestion I have, to do the research for who actually does that work in a good way. I think it is a gap. Particularly we work with lower income people, often in like I'll say in Massachusetts, it's a gap. It's a gap in need for people who are on their own and need that kind of ongoing support, particularly in managing finances, right? Who might be under guardianship but need additional support in terms of paying their bills and whatnot. I think it's a gap in services, and I kind of have known how to fill those gaps in because of some of the cases I've had in Massachusetts. But I'm certainly happy to do some digging about who provides those services in Rhode Island. And I don't know if some other folks on this call might have insights into that as well, because certainly it is a really important need. And I will also say that I'm going to ask, we have a GLAD answers line, right? A legal information and resources line. So I'm going to ask those folks as well to see what they can pull together. So I'll put my email in the chat.
Because the reality is that, a lot of this is I think anybody who does this work, will have an intake form with kind of just the general questions and trying to get a general framework. But really it is, there's definitely going to be back and forth with you and the attorney, like you said, to kind of suss out some additional questions and make sure that there's really a true understanding of the dynamics in your life and the people around you and who are going to be involved in these decisions. And then obviously then there's the actual drafting of the documents. And, and I think the other thing too is that I've worked with different people who are just, whatever you say is fine. And, I don't understand the legalese, so I'm going to trust you to draft it. And then I've had other people who I've drafted it and they want to see drafts, and they want to weigh in on the language and feel like, so I think that that also depends on, how you want to work with your attorney as well.
And I will say I think I'll be frank. I think it always costs, sorry, lawyer Dawn, but I think it always costs more than you think it's going to cost.
Yes.
Right. Like, I have, in my experience as a consumer, worked really successfully with, I feel like there are some lawyers out there who are really awesome and clear and straightforward with their billing, and some people who nickel and dime you. Do you know what I mean? And that's one of the kind of exploration questions, which you have to find a nice way to ask, right? But which is, tell me about your billing practices, right? Because I personally really enjoy working with the lawyers who, that you're going to send them a question and it's just going to be, it's not going to be, you're not going to get charged for every basic question you have, right? And it's more of a process and an education. But I think that's part of the kind of vetting process. And I also think that, for people who have less access to resources, it's so important to just do the online. If nothing else, do the Rhode Island provided forms for your healthcare proxy so that you have your medical decision-making solved. And I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, Don, but one of my folks in the GLAD Answers did some research, and it sounds like there is a program, through Rhode Island, the Rhode Island Bar Association in consultation with the Rhode Island Department of Elderly Affairs to provide some legal services for elders, or at least consultations about rights, depending on where you live or what your income qualifications are. So I feel like there are some legal resources out there. I will share that information that my GLAD Answers pulled with Kathy to share with you all. But certainly, to the extent that there's pro bono legal services available, I think that's an incredibly important resource for folks to use and to be aware of. But in when I said that, I think things to cost more than, I think lawyers, reputable lawyers who spend good time and work on case, this is careful planning that takes time. But hopefully the communication is there at the outset so that people aren't surprised. Sorry, I think someone had a question.
Well, I wanted to throw something in and go back to the medical power of attorney that occurred to me after we finished that conversation. That is, it's great to have all the legal stuff in line. And my response would be, whatever forms there are, the more forms you have, the better. Having spent a lot of time with dying people and with their families, some doctors are tenacious about not letting go. And my experience is they tended to be younger. They had less life experience and they were a little anxious about letting go. Older doctors in general seem to be more, they're easy. I don't know. I always found them easier to deal with. But I would say the other, for me, and this is what I did in terms of deciding who was going to have power of attorney for me. I think you need to find someone who's really going to be an advocate for you and be tenacious, who really knows what you want and will fight for you what you want. Just because someone has a piece of paper that says the power of attorney, a persuasive doctor can put questions in their mind and they can waffle on what you want, and you're no longer capable of making that decision. So, and I've seen that, and I've seen situations where, as a clergy person, I had to step in and advocate for the person because the family member nobody had taken that into account. So I would just add that as another qualification when you're looking for someone to give that power to. Make sure they're going to advocate for you, and that they're not going to back down. I mean, they should listen to what the doctors have to say, but if they know what you really want, they need to advocate for you, because just because it's on paper doesn't mean it always happens.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think that's why also when you're in those conversations, the planning conversations about the medical issues, going through that advanced directive form as well can also really help put some clarifying, again, some of those really key, like artificial ventilators, intubation, all of those things that, are really, kind of those extraordinary life-saving measures, which you may be comfortable with and you may not be. But it helps going through filling out that form helps you have those conversations. And, when you're trying to figure out who your proxy is going to be, and you're explaining your wishes, you'll be able to get a sense as to exactly what the Reverend is saying, if there's somebody who are going to be able to advocate for you in the way that you'll be needing.
Yeah, and I think whoever that advocate is needs to go over that form too. And what does it mean to withhold, if you're not going to hydrate, for example. I mean, some of the information about hydrating is very counterintuitive. And so that person that's going to advocate for you needs to be somebody who is going to advocate for you, understands the issues, and quite honestly is not intimidated by the environment, because you are on foreign soil. When you are the relative of the patient or the advocate for the patient, if you don't live in that world, that's a very intimidating world. And doctors can be very intimidating people. And I love doctors. Some of my best friends are doctors. But it's really, so I mean, I love everything you're saying. I mean, I've done it all myself personally because I believe it. But having done all that, there is this other step of making sure even if it's not your favorite relative, if you're sure they're going to do what you want them to do. I mean, I have two daughters, and I chose my younger daughter, not my older daughter. Not because my older daughter isn't a great person, but my younger daughter's a tiger. And we have had very, very serious conversations. And I trust she knows what I want, and I know she's going to advocate for me. And I have total confidence in that. But I think that's something people should think through. It isn't just who's the next person in line, who should I give it to, whatever, because it could make a very big deal. I mean, I don't want to wake up someday hooked up to a bunch of machines. I just don't.
I mean, the rights we're talking about are so fundamental, right? The right to make your own health decisions, the right to your own autonomy, the right to that. These are protections that kind of transcend identity, right? And that have been in state law for a very long time. And I think are not going anywhere, right? And also the state of Rhode Island has had LGBTQ protections, you know, for many, you know, I think the states, and particularly the New England states, have so many good protections in place. So anyway, so in terms of like the fundamentals of healthcare decision making and wills and all of these kind of very personal rights, I feel really confident that we're good. Like, I think we're good. No, obviously, it doesn't say that people don't experience discrimination with providers and the various settings, which we'll always continue to work on, but that you will have access to these rights. And even in terms of like rights of like, you know, marriage equality or, you know, other, you know, other cases that have come down, right? I feel like still, you know, those protections are, you know, I think I hear, you know, we're on solid ground, right? We can't let up, obviously, but that we have, you know, some of those constitutional rights that have been clarified and established are for the LGBTQ community, you know, very well rooted. And, you know, there might be the opportunity for some carve out of religious exemptions in some ways, but that we certainly need to keep fighting, but that particularly in these kind of personal decision-making planning documents or discussions we're having right now, I just want to say I think that we have good protections in place, and I don't see those going away. And they should apply to everybody, every Rhode Islander. Dawn, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, I, you know, look at the national picture and am very horrified, and also very glad that I live in Rhode Island. And, you know, like Polly said, Rhode Island has been a leader on so many of these laws. You know, I mean, just on the related topic around parentage, you know, Rhode Island was decades ahead of the rest of the country on parentage. And the laws that we rely on for, you know, the medical decision making, estate planning, those are really, you know, these are well settled principles that are not, and I mean, even some of the elements of how marriage equality interacted with some of these. I mean, don't forget, marriage equality passed in Rhode Island. We were the 10th state to pass that law, and it's a state law. So even if, you know, something happened on the U.S. Supreme Court level, you know, Rhode Island has state laws in place that, you know, are setting a standard that do give broad protections and rights. So I think that we should be comfortable and confident in our New England, our little New England zone. This is another, you know, kind of pitch for working one-on-one with a lawyer, because, you know, what you don't want to do is have designations in legal documents and then have other legal documents that are contradictory, because that's where issues could arise. But having, you know, working with an attorney, when you work with an attorney, make sure they know what other legal agreements you have in place, so that they can make sure that, you know, all of the other documents that they were helping you draft are in line, or that your older documents get updated as needed.
Make a point concerning our last conversation, having to do with the fact that sometimes I think one of the issues people encounter is healthcare providers who are not well trained or who don't really understand certain issues. So although, you know, I agree that we are, particularly here in Rhode Island, in a good position in terms of being able to feel secure in the rights that have been obtained so far. This is almost a bit of a plug for SAGE for the training that has been going on, because it really makes a difference if the healthcare professional you encounter is really prepared to accept those documents and really understand some of the issues involved. And that can be an important component of protecting people's rights as well.
I want to thank everybody for the opportunity to present and to have this conversation today. I hope everybody found it useful. I think that this is a big topic. So I think that finding an attorney that you can work with, that you're comfortable with, to help answer your specific questions. Hopefully we gave you the tools to be more comfortable in those conversations, and to have those follow-up conversations that you need to have.